Hello, and welcome to part 3 of the Coloring Faces tutorial. In the previous 2 lessons, I taught coloring techniques for eyes and noses. You can check those out here, and I will also put the episode links in the description below. You don't need to watch these tutorials in that specific order. I intentionally made each of them into a nice standalone lesson. But I do recommend that you watch all 3 of them at some point to really get the full picture of how I approach coloring all 3 major elements of the face. That being said, let's talk about lips. Lips are very interesting and need to be approached differently depending on the size of the line drawing that you're working with. Most of us color with pencils, markers, or paints. Consider the size of the tip of your pencil, pen, or brush. Even with an extremely finely sharpened pencil, there's only that much detail that you can get on something this tiny. Also, consider your audience. Even if you use a magnifying glass and tiny brushes to paint the little tiny details of these tiny lips in full realism, whoever looks at your coloring won't be using a magnifying glass. All that detail will be completely lost on them. When working on physically small drawings, it's literally enough to use a single color on the lips, making the top lip slightly darker and the bottom lip slightly lighter. But many coloring pages have larger face drawings that allow for more detail. For instance, if we were to color the lips on last week's page, which is available for download in my Facebook group, by the way, here in the profile view, there isn't that much detail on the lips, but there's still more. I can approach coloring these in a very similar way to the tiny lips, making the top lip a little bit darker and the bottom lip a little bit lighter. But since I do have that extra surface area to cover, I can also play with some gradient and white highlights. On the front view, we have lots to play with. Again, the top lip will be darker and the lower lip a little bit lighter. Here though, we're dealing with diagonal lighting and a Rembrandt shadow cast by the nose. Check out the coloring noses lesson to learn about that. So you can see that my white highlight corresponds with the well-lit side of the face, and the darker part of the lower lip is on the darker side of the face. You can also see that I have enough space here to suggest the texture of the lips with a few lines. And of course, the illusion of three-dimensional lips is sold by that shadow under the lower lip. Now remember, this rule of the top lip is darker and the bottom lip is lighter only applies if your character is lit from above, which is usually a pretty safe assumption to make. Most of the time, we draw and color characters lit either by sunlight or by indoor lighting, both of which tend to be overhead light sources. But exceptions are sometimes made. You may have a character holding a candle near her face, for instance, or standing over a glowing cauldron. Under the chin lighting does happen, and then the rules reverse. Remember this one? Lit from above, top lip is darker, and the white highlight falls on the fuller bottom lip. Lit from below, the top lip gets all the direct light, and most of the bottom lip is in shadow. Although, because bottom lips tend to be fuller, the underside of the bottom lip also gets some light on it. Remember to be consistent with your lighting. Make sure that if you decide that the character is lit from above, all of the elements of the face are lit from above, which in most cases they will be. Now let's do something really fun. Sometimes you get a super close-up and detailed portrait, and that's when lips get really interesting. To demonstrate all the wonderful details that can be brought out in the lips with color, I drew this page for you guys to play with. Let's color it together. I printed this drawing on tan-toned paper to simulate the underlying skin tone. This allows me to dive straight into the white highlights, which I'm doing with white charcoal. If you're working on white paper, do take the time to color in the skin tone around the lips as well as on the lips themselves, leaving just the parts that you plan to dedicate to white highlights blank. You can imagine how much longer that will take. That's the main reason that I'm working with tan. Now, you will notice that I took the time to actually draw out all the little thin lines that will guide you in this coloring. Many coloring pages are not this detailed. You may only have the outline of the lips to work with. Not to worry though, all the same principles of light, shadow, and color will apply to any style of line drawing. Hopefully though, doing this guided coloring with my lines and my commentary will give you enough practice to simulate light and shadow decisions when coloring work that is not quite as detailed as this sample page. Moving on, I really want to emphasize the roundness of these lips. So next I introduce this band of light peach that indicates the part of the lip curve that is the closest to the viewer. Now I move on to establish my shadows. There are 2 very important shadows that almost always occur on the lips when the face is lit directly or slightly from above, the most common lighting that you will encounter. And they are the shadow under the lower lip and the shadow on the lower part of the upper lip. The three-dimensional illusion begins with these shadows. I'm using chestnut to establish both of these. Note that I'm using the same color for both the shadows that are cast onto the skin as well as the shadow on the lip. The shape and the structure of lips is a lot more important than their color. A very common mistake that colorists make is jumping straight into pink and red for lips. I cannot stress this enough. Color doesn't make lips, shape does. I continue working with my chestnut brown and add secondary shadows that will help define the roundness of the lips. Now I switch to a very dark brown to color in the parts of the mouth that are not very well lit. This clearly indicates that the mouth is open. But I don't just color all the inside of the mouth in dark brown and black. See how I take the time to establish a gradient? Making the furthest, deepest parts of the open mouth darker enhances the 3D illusion. I add a little bit of red on the tongue as well. And as long as I'm already working with red, it may be a good time to introduce some color to my lips. I want my character to be wearing red lipstick. The shape of the lips is already well defined, and I have my whitest highlights in place, so it's the perfect time to add makeup. I start with a dark red. Lips are very textured. I intentionally gave you lots of directional lines to work with. Make sure to keep your pencil strokes consistent with the direction of those lines. What I mean is, don't just start shading left to right. See how every one of my pencil strokes actually outlines the suggested 3D shape of the lips? That's intentional. The direction of your pencil lines will enhance the realism effect. Now I switch to a brighter, more traditional red. This part is subtle, but very important. Lips never have a clean outline. Even when makeup is applied with a lip liner or lipstick, that contour line is ever so slightly blurred. And that's just a function of human skin and its texture. There will always be a slight bleed in color. I like to make sure to add just a slight suggestion of a blurry edge all around. Be careful not to overdo this, but also don't just give the lips a clean, thick color outline. You need to find a middle ground. And it's not really about what anyone will see, it's about what they won't see. If your audience doesn't see blurry smudged makeup, and at the same time they don't see clean, unnatural lip outline, if these two things don't jump out at them, you got the effect just right. I continue shaping the lips with light and dark reds and browns, going over some of the texture lines with more definition, and adding more saturation where I feel it's needed. This part is all personal preference. I'm making these lips overly exaggerated, shiny and red for the sake of demonstrating all the light, shadow, and texture nuance. But you could stick with natural tones or different makeup shades, less shimmer, totally your call. To enhance the shiny effect, I suggest you bring out the contrast a bit. And the way you do that is through making the shadows a little darker and the highlights a little lighter. My highlights are already as light as they will ever get, pure white, so I bring up my contrast by adding rich browns and dark red tones to the shadows. I'm also constantly adjusting the skin around the lips to make sure that it makes sense with my colors. The cherry is there for multiple reasons. The first and most obvious, of course, is that it's just an attractive accessory, but it serves other purposes. The stem, for instance, is strategically placed to enhance the 3D effect, and that can be brought out with the soft shadow that it casts. That one single shadow shows us that there's a distance between the stem and the skin. Another cool benefit of this prop is demonstrating the softness of the lip. You see where the stem is slightly pressed into the lower lip? The adjusted shape of the line drawing of the lip already does most of the job of establishing the shape change, but you can make it even cooler by adding a couple of shadows around the stem. The stem even splits the white highlight in two by squishing the lip in the middle. If we didn't have the cherry stem, we would probably just have one large white highlight on that lower lip. And finally, the cherry is there for color comparison. We all know what color cherries are, whereas lipstick shades can vary. Having a universal color reference shows that your chosen lip color is intentional. This doesn't mean that you have to add cherries to every single lip drawing, it's just a fun thing for this exercise. And now we move on to the scariest part of coloring the mouth, and that's teeth. I intentionally left the teeth part to the very end. Honestly, all these steps can be done in a completely different order. You may wish to start with dark shadows, or start with the white highlights. Every single colorist will have his or her unique way of approaching this page. But I do recommend that you stick to two main rules regardless. 1, color the lips with a gentle skin tone before you add makeup effects. And 2, leave the teeth for last. And not just because they're the scariest part, mainly because you want to see the full picture to know how much shadow you need to add. In this case, we need to add a lot of shadows. Never color teeth with just white. Like the whites of the eyes, teeth are never really white, and they're almost always in the shadow cast by the top lip. So this is going to be really scary, but bear with me. I'm going to use a very dark gray on the teeth, blending it with soft gray and leaving just a few tiny white highlights on the edges of the teeth, suggesting that enamel feel. Remember that teeth are slightly rounded, they're not just flat white squares, so make sure that you add the white highlights a bit off the edge and not right on the edge. I keep adding and adjusting this shadow on the teeth, and I also adjust the shadow and color on the lip where the two meet, until I arrive at the desired effect. For the very final touch on the lips, I add a mere suggestion of red. Because teeth are slightly reflective, the glow of that intense red lipstick will be seen in the teeth. But again, be super careful not to overdo this. Notice that I'm not adding red highlights or spots. That would look like her lipstick is smeared all over her teeth. Instead, I'm adding a barely visible semi-transparent layer of red, like a glow effect. Again, probably no one will notice this detail, but that's the idea. It's way better than them noticing that something is wrong or unnatural. Once you start getting into more advanced coloring like this, you will quickly notice that most of your effects are what I call behind the scenes effects. You will invest a lot of learning and practice time, thought, trial and error, and finally apply the effect just for someone to glance over your work and go, yeah, cool, looks amazing, totally real. How did you do that? That's a successful coloring. And yes, part of us wants everyone to know all the blood, sweat, and tears that go into every single magical effect, but the reality is you don't want to bore your audience with it. True magic is seamless. What you want is to present a beautiful illusion of ease and perfection. Let them wonder how you did it. Or better yet, share this tutorial with them and let them learn for themselves. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please take a moment to give it the thumbs up. Come collect the download of the practice page in my Facebook group, Tom. If you don't already subscribe to my channel, please do so. I'm Lisa Mitrakin. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.